Hi, I'm Heather Sugg with Fintech Futures. We are here at Fintech Meetup, and I'm joined by Brant with AtData. Welcome.
Thank you, Heather, for having me.
Nice to have you. We are talking about fraud today.
Yes.
There's a lot to discuss, but let's start from the top. If you'll
Okay.
tell me about yourself and the background you have in fraud.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm very fortunate to have been brought into this space by a wonderful peer, and certainly somebody that I've leaned on for the past 5 years getting into this space. But a gentleman by the name of Scott Stone, who was a founder at chargeback.com. Um, he pulled me into this space after I spent 10 years in architecture and design. So I actually fit kind of outside. So I had a different perspective and lens perhaps,
Mm.
but it allowed me to get really, start from the ground up and kind of build up my knowledge set as I started looking at what payment fraud was, what a chargeback was. I didn't even know what that stuff was in 2020. So, I joined chargeback.com. I've always been in a selling capacity. And so I helped them build up what they were doing in terms of their sales processes, closing some business. And then ultimately we got purchased by Sift. So for the fraud people in the community, you'll be very familiar with Sift. Had a great experience there, and it really rooted like, I want to stay in this industry and just learn as much as I can. And now I'm with AtData, which is very exciting because I have some platform experience, but now I'm getting into more of that, like, okay, what does the data do for the fraud industry specifically, which is very exciting.
Tell me more about this. So, with
Sure.
AtData, what is the fraud data that you're using and how is it being used?
Yeah. So AtData is unique in that we solely look at the email and the email intelligence metrics that we can derive from that single email address. So email is nothing new to fraud. It's been around for, I would say, close to 15 years, when it really started to gain traction in the community for fraud investigators, teams that were looking at risk in a different way. And what's unique about what we're doing with the email is that we've been an enterprise data company for 23 years. So we didn't get our start in fraud. We in fact got our start in the MarTech side of the space, where our founder and CEO Tom Burke essentially placed a bet the email would be our digital identity. And I think it was a pretty smart bet to make because we use email on a regular basis.
Mhm.
And what it's allowed us to do is we got our start in one aspect, but then now what we're able to do is, because we process so many billions of emails a month, we can start to look at, well, what type of products can we build with this? How does that apply to one specific company or one specific segment, where we can start to build out those robust APIs that are needed for marketing type services or fraud services is what we call our product.
So, you're building out the APIs to enable other fintechs and others to use this data and that you've been building. Tell me how it works and what the process is.
Sure, yeah. So the email that we're collecting is coming into us through our network. So again, we've got 23 years of data that we're seeing. We're processing about 2.1 billion active emails a month. That leads to about 6 billion activity signals within that data set. What we do with that is we start to look at what's going on behind the email. How is the identity of the email being shaped? What is the velocity of it that we're seeing in our network? What is the popularity that we're seeing in our network? When was it last seen? When was it first created? So we're tracking all of those different types of data points that provide essentially a risk score
Mhm.
that a merchant, a fraud team, a fintech could essentially leverage as part of their own workflows. So again, we are not a fraud platform. We are very much an enterprise data company where we're passing you back the data you need so you can either create products or route them into existing products, or route them into existing workflows. We're proverbially the way to describe it is we're the premium gasoline that makes the engine run.
Absolutely. Then the fintech or the merchant or whoever chooses to use the data may set their rules, set their boundaries, and build this fraud mitigation strategy around what they're able to find in your email addresses. And what other kinds of data are you sharing?
So yeah, it's funny. I get asked this a lot. Like, well, what else are you looking at? And our simple response is email, 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 email. But we do on the fraud services side of the house, we can look at email IP, full name, as well as physical address. Because we've got emails, we also have been collecting physical addresses. So we can look at like name anomalies, physical address anomalies tied to that specific email address, which help us give more clarity into why we may have scored an email low, high, or in the middle. We do run on machine learning models. Those machine learning models can be trained specifically to your fraud demographic. But typically but really the only compulsory field that somebody needs to give us is the email address.
Mhm.
The other information helps apply context, but it's not necessarily providing the main result.
Understood. So you mentioned machine learning.
Yes.
I want to know more. We have talked earlier about fraud being this area that we are all constantly always learning. We need to stay on top of everything that changes every day.
Absolutely.
What are you doing at AtData to make sure that the process is continually evolving? What have you seen changing?
Yeah. So this is a great question. Innovation is paramount in this industry because fraudsters are very adaptive. You could think that they're always kind of one step ahead. And so we have to be, we ourselves have to put ourselves one step ahead. We do leverage machine learning models to help train specific fraud demographics. One of the things that we've figured out over the past few years is fraud looks different to every single person. And when I say person, any merchant, any bank, whether you're selling in Europe, whether you're selling in Central America, South America, North America, fraud is different for everybody. So what we have to do is really apply the context that we can see from the email address. We use machine learning logic to help us train those data sets to be as effective as possible. But something that we're really looking into now is the use of generative AI within our own database. So what can we start to extract that maybe we haven't seen before? How can we build out better identity graphs that make more sense and easier for teams to follow, which can be at lightning speed? So we deliver, because it's API based, we're a real-time fraud prevention solution. That's what we do. It's in real time, right? So again, it's paramount within the fraud space to, you can't really let time pass. You really have to be on top of it to allow yourself to, to capture that fraud appropriately, but also most effectively.
So specifically in the real-time scenario, that would also help you, I imagine, if you're seeing mass hits across an address or something that's been a flag in that sense.
Yeah. There's we look at it from both ways, right? So we've got velocity, which could be maybe we've seen an email once over the past 6 months. That's great. We're classifying that, we're indexing that, we're understanding kind of what that means in our own ecosystem. But like you said, if we see something that's been hit 500 times, and we get an email back from somebody, well, we're going to pass that. That's going to really affect the risk score,
Right.
because it's strange behavior.
Absolutely.
It doesn't fit the mold of, Heather or Brant going on and shopping online or placing an order on whatever it might be. So we look at those behavioral traits as well and index those against kind of what we're seeing, which is not normal behavior.
So for the banks and the fintechs that are listening right now and the fraud vendors, if they want to use your API to have access to this data, what does that look like? What are some of the use cases you've seen?
Yeah. So what's really neat about the data side of the world is that we have really an undefined vertical or an undefined territory that we can work within. Really, at any point along any user journey where you're taking in an email, whether it be on a contact form, on the banking side, it could be if they're creating a new account. Wherever we see that email, we can take that in, we can score that, and then we can provide that back in real time. So it makes it very easy to access it. But the other way we look at it is we're typically going to be a low-cost solution at the top of a funnel to where we can start to really realize value. Hey, if we get a good score that's coming in, maybe you want to pass that person through without any friction. Maybe you want to remove their 2FA if they don't need it, right? There's a lot more expensive calls than AtData when it comes to APIs. And we really fit well in that kind of right at the top of the funnel as you're acquiring that email address. From that regard, it's just very simple in terms of integration. Is we're a single line of script, or it's a single endpoint that you call. We give you back the data in a JSON format. We're not a platform. We're not a clunky integration. And really, we've doubled down on the fact that we want to be the leaders in email address intelligence. And so that's kind of where we put ourselves and pride ourselves. And just to that extent, I think it's probably worth knowing for your community. In North America, we recognize about just shy of 99% of all emails. And what that means is we've got just a massive amount of data that we're already seeing. But as we go out into the world, one of the questions that we get asked a lot is, well, are you a global company? Absolutely, because we can take in email from anywhere in the world. So we have different rates and different identity rates in other countries, but we're very much a global entity because email is very much a global identity.
Absolutely. Oh, in addition to the fraud, the ability to ease that friction is a big point that I hadn't thought of yet.
Yes.
We've all been in that case as a consumer where a big tech will say, well, I recognize you, you may proceed. And it's a breath of relief. I think that it's interesting to have both sides of that coin as we continue to balance fraud and consumer experience.
Yeah, definitely. I fully agree with that.
What is it from what you've seen in your career and at AtData that you feel makes for a most effective fraud prevention strategy?
I love this question because from somebody coming from outside of the industry, and now immersing myself into the the fraud community, the risk the risk managers, your fraud prevention managers. I think what's been most telling about it is it's not a one size fits all solution in any regard. I don't run fraud teams, but I listen to a lot of fraud teams and I try to understand what their pain points are and how they're affected by fraud. And I'll say a healthy fraud prevention strategy is you've got to have a lot of data. You've got to have it coming from a lot of different sources that are reputable. But you also have to be able to orchestrate that in a proper way. So what are the workflows that you're writing? What are the rules that you're maybe leaning on? How can you be very reactionary or very reactive to a massive bot attack or somebody spinning up hundreds of thousands of emails at a time to try to, for credential stuffing and things along those lines. So I would say from my perspective, always just kind of try to be learning, see what's new in the market, what is innovating in the space. Everybody's talking about AI. There's definitely a place for it. We work with some companies that are leveraging AI to respond and adapt the rules that they're writing internally, which is, I think, very efficient and smart. And there's going to be a lot more of that to come. But I think for the big businesses out there, again, always be exploring and don't get stuck in the status quo because this is an industry that is really moving quickly.
Brant, it's been an honor talking to you. Thanks for all the information and keeping us informed.
Yeah, this has been great.
Enjoy the rest of your show.
Thank you so much.